Yeah, I think the best example of that is permafrost. Like in Inuit cultures, most houses are actually built above the ground. They're not actually connected to the ground like with a slab foundation.
That's
That's
true?
big.
Really?
Yeah, and that's because of permafrost. Because permafrost, if you have something that's sitting on the ground, it actually melts the permafrost, and the building will shift.
And you could release stuff into the atmosphere
Right, yeah.
that's been
Yeah.
sitting dormant forever, right?
I don't think that never would have even crossed my mind as a barrier. Like, I never would have even thought of that.
You're listening to One Feather, Two Pens. Lessons and stories from Indigenous peoples, building and navigating digital sovereignty. A special series on What's That Noise?
We start all of our podcasts with a nod and a land acknowledgement for all of those folks that are listening, in particular our brothers and sisters across Canada, across Turtle Island. I think just to acknowledge right out of the gate that we all live and breathe on unceded traditional territories of Indigenous people and communities across the country. We acknowledge that. And we see you in that. And we make this acknowledgement because it's important. One, I think, just to reiterate that many of these things are unresolved, and there's work to be done there. And through the work of reconciliation and all those people that are participating in that space and helping move those things along, hands up to all of you. And for everyone else, I think just a nod and appreciation for that work, and that we all continue to live and breathe and work and play on these beautiful lands. And thank you for the opportunity to do so. Feel like this though.
Thanks very much for the wonderful introduction, as always, Lawrence. Really appreciate you, man. Stan, we're really grateful to have you here. We've come to know quite a bit about your very, very interesting and detailed background, not only in housing and tech development, but also in law enforcement in this country. And it's a real pleasure to have you here, Stan. So feel free to say hello to our listeners and to kindly introduce yourself. We'd really appreciate that. Thanks again.
First of all, thanks for having me on here. It's a great opportunity to talk about our program, and that's kind of one of the biggest things that we are trying to accomplish is to get out in front of everybody and talk about our program and try to build as much support as we can. So my name's Stan Knight. I'm from Pasquia Cree Nation, and I have this program called Inspector in a Box. And the big thing is to develop capacity within remote Indigenous communities across Canada and to fix housing. That's our stated mission, and that's kind of everything that we're trying to do right now is get out there, provide the capacity development within Indigenous communities so that they can take control of the inspection process, build that wealth within the Indigenous communities and hire their own, train their own, and move all renovations forward under their own control instead of having to be subject to whatever whims that the outside contractors bring in.
So this is what you refer to as when you say inspector in a box. And I'm curious, Stan, would you mind telling us a little bit more about the concept? Like what exactly is in the box? What do you mean by that?
Oh, sure. Inspector in a Box is just like we've always seen that remote Indigenous communities have such a hard time bringing a skill set to the community to do work. It's so expensive because you got to fly them in, you got to put them up for accommodations, you got to feed them, and then you got to make sure that they are getting out. Or if they're weather bound, then you pay extra fees for that person's time. So we looked at that issue and said, you know what, with technology that we have today, why can't we just provide the tools that are needed to do data capture, to do inspections, and do asset management and energy rebate programming and all that other stuff, and collect all that data? And then all that data can come to a centralized location, like to me, and then I can interpret that data and produce all the outcomes that were needed, like the reporting, scopes of work, Class B cost estimates, funding applications, all of that. without me having to travel and incur all that cost. And the long-term vision of that is to actually build the capacity at the local level and train a local candidate to take over our role. So we work ourselves out of that job, and we leverage technology, because like one of the greatest, most impactful technologies that we've had in recent years is Starlink. Like that has been a game changer for Indigenous communities, because now we're connected to the world and we can see what's happening in the world, and we can actually learn from all these technologies that are out there.
Do you find? I mean, I think your motivation for Inspector in a Box, you've laid out. I think that's super clear, and it's powerful stuff. How do you how are you finding communities embracing that technology, and are there are there other impacts you need to consider in terms of like geography or demography or culture, or just a readiness to embrace doing it a little bit different than may have been done before?
I think communities are really like, when we have a chance to actually sit down with the communities and explain the program, like they're really like they're shocked at the idea. I think they are skeptical of the success of the idea, because we've had a lot of new ideas floated past, right? We've had a lot of new ideas that are just, they look good on paper, but there's a disconnect between the real realities of being in remote communities and doing the work and leveraging all of those skill sets that we're trying to teach. But I think the big thing is, from my perspective, is I've been in these remote communities for all my life, and I understand what those difficulties are. I've gone and completed those inspections and done that reporting and did all that work myself. So I think I come from a unique perspective, is that I understand the technology and I understand the realities of what we're trying to accomplish with Inspector in a Box. And I think that's why I'm so passionate about it, is because I believe it works. And every community we've talked to, like they're just guns ablazing. So let's do this. But it's capacity from my side of it that's really holding us back at this point, because we are really bootstrapping this project, because we are, like, I've been paying for my own wages for the past year, and just developing everything through my own funds, because we are avoiding outside investment, because we want to have control of this program and have the final say as to how it's implemented and who it's implemented with, and what the final product is.
For me, reflection, and just in terms of how important it is that our people are actually the leaders and stewards of these new ideas, right, and these new concepts and these new approaches. And we did a podcast before with Chief Bobby Joseph here on the West Coast, and he called this effort the new warrior, if you like, the new braid, the new digital warrior of today, where folks like you can go out there and make connection with communities around this new technologies and new approaches, and because of your history and your connection to your people and being Indigenous, that you show up with some integrity and some a trust built in, right, and makes the adoption of these new technologies, digital technologies, I think, easier to process, right? And I think that's, I think if there's a fundamental message to the podcast and to the work that we all do in this space, is that in order for it to be, I think, adopted and embraced, it needs to be led by Indigenous people who make the space to interpret it and deliver solutions through our lived experience and our Indigenous lens, right? So I think I'm just, more than anything, not asking a question. I think just giving a nod to the idea that this is how how digital indigeneity needs to transform Indigenous communities and populations across the country.
Yeah, I could have said it better. It's about owning the technology and using it in our own way for our own benefits, to promote our own needs. I think that's one of the big things, is like every every answer that's been kind of thrown at the First Nations and Indigenous communities across Canada has always been imposed by the federal government. We've always been told what that answer is to solve our problems. Well, and we've seen the result, right? It's just garbage. When we are actually at the table and make those informed decisions and say, hey, look, this is what works for us. This is how we need to do it. When we actually implement those ideas, they work and they last. Like you look at the HAP program in Northwest Territories, where people were provided building materials and built their own houses. Like I'm up in Fort Simpson right now inspecting houses, and the HAP houses are the ones that are the best cared for and still standing. Like they're not the most code compliant because a lot of people built them with their own hands, right? But they're still standing and they're still loved and cared for. But and then you look at the market housing that the federal government has thrown at us, and it's like it's falling apart because it's not designed for our communities. And I think that's so important is we have to come up with our own answers and we have to be able to implement them within our own communities with our own ideas. And that's one of the fundamental ideas of our Inspector in a Box program is like I'm Indigenous, but I don't understand Inuit culture. I don't truly understand the BC Indigenous cultures. The only one that can make those decisions is a community member. And that's why we go in, we build capacity, but we're not there to take that role over for an extended period of time because we can't provide the cultural and history that's needed to truly understand what a community housing solution is. We can just provide the tools and say, here you go, adapt it to however you need it.
I'm always shocked, not shocked, embarrassed might be a better word with whenever I'm involved in these conversations with just how ignorant to all of it I am. But I'm relieved to hear that through your admittance saying, well, geez, I wouldn't be the best person to speak on behalf of the Inuit culture. I wouldn't be the first one to know how what their needs are. But it does kind of make me very, very curious because if you could step back a little bit for somebody like me that's maybe not as involved as you are, could you help us understand kind of what an Inuit housing need would be versus maybe somebody on the west coast of Canada versus somebody maybe even in Eastern Ontario or something like that? Could you help us kind of understand what the housing needs are and what the fight is for them to get better representation for what their needs are?
Yeah, I think the best example of that is permafrost. Like in Inuit cultures, most houses are actually built above the ground. They're not actually connected to the ground like with a slab foundation.
That's true, really?
Yeah, and that's because of permafrost. Because permafrost, if you have something that's sitting on the ground, it actually melts the permafrost, and the building will shift.
And you could release stuff into the atmosphere,
right?
That's been sitting dormant forever, right?
I don't think that never would have even crossed my mind as a barrier. Like I never would have even thought of that.
Yeah, so we have to build a different model for Inuit housing in the north because their underside is exposed, right? So how do we make sure that cold air doesn't transfer inside the building, but still keep it off the ground so it doesn't actually create a heat that penetrates the permafrost and changes that foundational material?
So you're looking like when you look at the building itself, you wouldn't necessarily like if somebody didn't show you the bottom of the building, would the building look different itself, or it's just like higher up?
Yeah, it's higher up, and you'll see it sits on like a skeleton foundation underneath, but there's nothing on the ground that interferes with the permafrost in Inuit communities, right? So a lot of times you'll see them; they're just fully exposed, and it just allows the snow to blow right through because it's not a foundational part of that house because it doesn't provide heat or anything else, but it prevents it from melting the permafrost.
You're right. Like that's something that you're like, no. Like trust us, we know, right? Like, yeah,
that's right. Yeah. Been here a long time.
Yeah.
Let us help you.
Yeah. So a couple of the biggest things with like remote housing, like they use screw piles, which is big long screws that goes into like past the permafrost into the actual thawed hard ground. Like that's one option for a foundation, and they they use also like triadasic foundations, which is basically just a skeleton of triangles that support on point loads the whole building, but it's a foundational material that can be used to be adjusted whenever like freeze thaw cycles come through. But you look at like the wall thickness, like down south here, like R20 is a perfectly fine wall thickness, but in the north up here, like we're looking at R40, R60 wall thicknesses, which is like double the wall thickness. So how do we compensate for that? What kind of material can we bring into it? Because you look at like in Nunavut, like that's above the tree line, so trees aren't a good resource up there. So what kind of materials can we bring in that are cheaper to ship? Because shipping is such a huge factor. Like when I looked after First Nations within my building supply work, like shipping was a third of the cost. We get $1 million projects, and 300,000 of that was just shipping to the site. Like, how do we address those things? And so we have to look at new building materials that are cheaper and lighter to ship.
So do those, and again, like not only culturally ignorant, but building ignorant, um, uh, are those materials suitable? Like when you're growing up to Inuit or something like that, are those like materials easy to get and order from, like, again, let's say London, Ontario, up there at a reasonable cost, or are those still hard to come by to even justify the cost to get them up there?
Well, if we look at the current methodology of stick framing, like that's everything like stick walls, trusses, floors, all of that. Like right now, if you switched over to like a polystyrene insulated wall system and floor system and roof system, like polystyrene is a quarter of the weight of shipping for as opposed to wood structures. So if we could ship 4 houses for the price of one. So like what does that do to your housing budget if you can actually reduce a 30-year cost by another 75% each time? Is those kind of things that we need to look at. You look at Build Canada Homes' recent announcement. Yeah, we're going to throw modular units everywhere and answer this. We're going to solve the housing crisis with this answer. But the reality is, we've gone through cycles already where they've thrown modular units or whatever the newest answer is into Indigenous communities, and we've seen the results of those. We've seen the results of not properly researching the environment that these units are going into and saying, okay, do they actually fit? The other thing is when we look at new building materials, like new building materials are going to last 100 years, 200 years. So now when we put a new building material into a new community, a new environment, we have to ask ourselves, is it going to be climate resilient? Like, if it's comfortable now, is it going to be comfortable in 50 years? Is it going to be comfortable in 100 years when our climate has changed? We have to be able to do proper research and say, okay, here's a building model that's going to be good in 100 years. That's still going to be comfortable and safe and mold resistant free. So we're trying to change the conversation about dollars going into housing. We need to change that focus and say, okay, we have to invest in fixing what we have right now, because if we can fix a home right now and make it safe, comfortable, then it opens a 15-year window where we can actually properly research what that answer is for that community, instead of having the federal government saying, here's your answer, here's some units, and maintenance will be up to you. And that's the biggest problem, because we have to change that conversation from just supply to supply and maintenance, because maintenance is such a big factor. Because if we don't have the proper maintenance cycle to a house, then that house you shorten that lifespan of that house by 50% just because you haven't maintained it within the first 10 years. Like, that makes a huge difference.
I feel like that was the lesson, and I can remember working the news desk when Ottawapiskat was doing its news run, and I feel like that was like the major eye opener for a lot of us so far south and off reservations and stuff, or reserves and stuff like that. Was we were able to look and just say, like, well, there's all those houses up there. How come they don't just go and live in those houses up there? And we were being told, we can't, like, those will fall apart and they're dangerous and they're not great. Right. And so it's funny. I'm just getting all those memories back from the emergency at Ottawapiskat, and just how the government was saying, okay, we've got the answers for you. And I can remember even working the news desk at the time and saying, but do you really though? Because I feel like you don't. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this has been a great lesson for me just this far. We're not even 20 minutes into the episode yet.
Mhm.
I'm learning about the tools that are needed with Indigenous people, having conversations with the communities about what's required. And it raises a question for me, Stan, if I may. So we've talked a lot about the material things that are required to go and do this work, but what has to be in your digital toolbox? What are the Indigenous tools, the digital tools that makes your work possible?
Are you talking like the technology or just the like the sovereignty?
Yeah, I think we could be pragmatic and
'Cause
philosophical about this one. This is what I try to do in these episodes. I tee it up to go wherever you want, and
The answer is yes.
Yeah. All those things. Yeah.
Okay, so for the actual technology that's involved is like we use a drone so we can actually inspect the roofs without having to incur any high risk climbing on roofs and stuff like that, right? And it allows us to actually get really close up to like stovepipes, so we can see if there's creosote buildup in the stovepipes and those kind of things. We can see the roof as a whole system as opposed to being limited by what we can see at one given point. So, like when you see the bigger picture, you can actually see how rain is diverted across the roof and where the wear sections are and where things need to be addressed, right? Sometimes it's not the whole roof needs to be replaced, but there's certain areas where the water is running specifically all the time because of like downspouts and gutters, and those are high wear patterns, and those are still going to cause a roof leak, and it's going to still get into your house and create mold, right? So if we can look at that and say, okay, here's the spots that need immediate repairs, then we've reduced the cost of replacing the whole roof. The other thing is with a drone, we can actually see drainage patterns for the property. So if you see, like, because the drainage patterns affect how the color of the grass is or the snow, right? You'll see how the ground changes. So you can actually see where the water runs whenever it's raining. So it helps you predict and address those issues so that you avoid, because water is the biggest issue with Indigenous housing, is because we have moisture or runoff or drainage or whatever. It's the biggest affector of Indigenous housing. So we use a drone to actually see that stuff, and we can do it safely, and it makes a big difference. Like we also use programs like apps to help us reduce the actual technical requirement to do the work. Like we use a program called Hover, and we just take 8 to 10 photos on the exterior of the building, and it gives us all the measurements, the building footprint, all the roof measurements, all the siding, walls, openings, everything. And then we use a program called Cubicasa, where we just LiDAR scan the interior of the house while we just walk in room to room, and it'll give us the building footprint and all the room measurements, and we can calculate all the casing and paint and everything we need for that.
So just to make sure that I'm understanding and the listeners are understanding properly. So you have a way to connect with the communities digitally to provide the training and the insight that they need, but you're also physically sending materials to these communities so that somebody in the community can go and do this work.
Yeah, we're sending a toolkit. So the toolkit contains, like the drone will contain a thermal camera so they can do inspections to see if there's air leakage in a wall or if there's moisture in the wall. Moisture meter to actually measure how much moisture is in like a floor or a wall if we determine that there's leakage in the wall. Like laser tape measuring. We send them a smartphone like an iPhone 13 Pro that has LiDAR functioning, so it allows the apps to be used. It'll be preloaded with our inspection software so they can actually do the inspection process and fill out the inspection report and take the photos. So they have all the technical tools to capture all the data, and all these tools are you can use them offline, so they're not tied to Wi-Fi or cell service. So you can actually go to do your inspection and come back, and all that data will upload automatically on its own. So it reduces that need to actually be connected all the time. because a lot of our communities aren't connected when you go to site to site to site. But you go back to the band office, and then all of a sudden you have Wi-Fi, and then you're connected again. So
that's awesome. I mean, that's incredible. I want to, if I may, I want to ask. I'm 57 years old, and embracing new technologies and new concepts and ideas, particularly in digital spaces, is can be a bit daunting and even a little kind of scary and sometimes even troubling. How did you find your way into this? Is this something? Is this an evolution that's happened over time with you, or have you had to be convinced along the way that this one particular piece of technology is good, and then how do we incorporate it with others? And I mean, we've talked, there's a whole network, an ecosystem of tools that have to be all linked up and talk to each other. And so, how did you navigate that? How did you find your way through all that?
I think it was just from experience, like from my life as building supply manager. I did a lot of estimating and used a lot of computer systems to do the work. And then when I went into insurance adjusting, I used a lot of the Xactimate cost estimating tools and Hover and all these other apps. It's just things I picked up, and then as I picked them up, I started thinking, you know what, these would be great for mostly for home inspection businesses. But then when we made the decision to be involved in First Nation housing or Indigenous housing across Canada and moved out to BC, we actually started kind of looking at them and saying, okay, how can we put these together to actually support capacity development for remote communities? Because we knew what the problem was when we moved out here, but we didn't know what that answer would look like in terms of building that capacity. And then we started slowly field testing everything. And the greatest part is like being able to field test. You have so much confidence in these tools and how they interconnect and how they can provide a really powerful capacity development tool, as well as ownership of that data. Because that's the big thing, is like, a lot of times Indigenous communities, like, they'll pay to have a home inspector come up, and that home inspector will give them reports. But what do you do with the report? Like, I've walked into countless housing manager offices with stacks of reports, and they're like, anybody can walk in a house and take a picture of a broken window and say, you got a broken window. But the skill set is like, what do you do with that broken window? How do you fix it? What's the cost? How do you plan for it? How do you access funding to do it?
And Lawrence used that phrase earlier. I can't remember if it was credibility or something along those lines. It alluded to credibility of somebody coming into your house to make sure that they were good enough to do it right. And if you've got an app that everybody trusts, it kind of takes the pressure off of somebody, like you were saying, you're training somebody to take over this job. It kind of alleviates some of the pressure of this guy saying, oh, geez, I'm kind of new at all of this, right? You're able to say, no, the computer is telling me exactly what I need to do, right? And then you can move from there.
Well, I think the other part of that is when we leverage local resources, local candidates, is they understand what's going on. They understand what the winter is like there. They understand what the fall and spring is, and they know where those problem areas are, right? And they know the people, and when they talk to the people, that the people can properly explain the issues that they're facing, because they can use their own terminology as opposed to trying to talk to somebody that's not from the community and doesn't understand some of those words, right? Because a lot of Indigenous language is intermixed with English, so they tend to throw like an Indigenous word in there to properly describe what they're dealing with, and we don't understand that, right? So that's one of the big things.
Stan, how receptive are people in the communities that you've worked with to having these tools come into their homes?
Oh, very receptive. They love it, because I think when you can actually produce reporting that is beneficial to them, even on a personal level, like you go into a house and you inspect the house and basically say the person is actually just interested in windows and doors, and you use Hover and you produce that report for them and you send it to them. And then you also say, oh, by the way, we also have cubic acid, where it's the building footprint or the room measurements, and you can use it to calculate. Like, you can send it to the lumber supply store, and they can tell you how much paint you need for your room, or you can lay out your cabinets. And they're like, oh, well, yeah, send it over. That's another tool that they can use, right?
I mean, it really paves. It really creates a pathway to solution, right? I mean, obviously, because like you said, that here's that window's broken and needs to be fixed. Well, yeah, we all understand and know that, but the real work is actually getting the window fixed, and you got to source that product. The dimensions of the window. I mean, you can't just walk into a hardware store and pick any window up off the rack. You've got to probably got to order it. You've got and where you are in the country is probably has some factor as well in terms of what type and I mean, there's just so many elements there. So I think that I think what you're doing is a tremendous service to our people to help. That last mile is always the hardest mile, right? And all too often it's like, all right, we've got you here. Good luck. And so like
my wife has given me a honey-do list that I've been able to ignore for weeks now. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Stan, I imagine there's a lot of data being collected then. You're using LiDAR and drones and lasers, and it really sounds like you're in the next century with your work here, man. And so we've talked a little bit about sovereignty the first time we got together. We heard you talk a little bit about ownership and control. I think when you have these tools and you're enabling someone in the community to use these tools effectively, there's so much empowerment and so much opportunity there. Can the same thing be said about the data that's collected? Like, what do you do with it? Is it protected? Do you put it into a secure facility? Is it shared? If the government comes knocking, is it something you have to hand over? What does that look like, and what does that mean for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. Like the principles of OCAP, like digital sovereignty for Indigenous communities, is a big issue that's really coming. Like we're just at the forefront of it, and like you look at Ontario and Quebec, where OCAP is kind of built into all contracts that are coming through the system there. The Western and Northern territories are slowly implementing it as well, but OCAP is kind of the principles of data sovereignty for Indigenous communities. And our compliance with that is first and foremost at every stage, the nation is the one that owns that data. They always have access to it 24/7. They can withdraw that. They can withdraw the permissions for that data at any given time because it is theirs, and it always will be. Our data is stored on RAID servers that are in Canada, so it never leaves international territories. And the company that we work for is Element Connect, and they're very cognizant of OCAP, and so all the data is locally sourced and retained.
Do nations? I mean, I guess the question is, do your First Nations clients understand or they understand the importance of that data and how to look after it and how to keep it safe and secure and make sure it survives? Or is that conversations you have with them as well?
No, I think one of those things is we address the problems before they become problems, right? So we address the issues with data sovereignty, and we maintain that ability to keep it for them. But once it's something that the nation is now prioritizing, and they'll say, okay, yeah, where's our data and how is it stored? And we have that answer for them and just say, hey, here it is, here's how it's addressed. Like some nations in the East, that's the first question they have is, how is our data kept? A lot of northern communities aren't really at that point yet. So, but we still address it. We still build it into our system right from the start.
I totally appreciate that. I mean, in my company as well with OneFeather, we have a lot of data and a lot of Indigenous data, and we have very clear policies and in terms of how that data will be stored and looked after and what the nation's rights are. Of course, they always retain the right to always have it and to have it destroyed if they just need to ask, and we'll demonstrate that it's been destroyed and that kind of stuff. And it's all consent based. I mean, it's always consent and then affirmation and then consent and then reaffirmation. So it's never a one and done. We're always reminding them that they have that and asking them to reaffirm that it's okay that we hold that data and remind them about what they're that it's theirs and however they want it, they can have it. Or if they just want it gone, we'll erase it as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's kind of one of the important parts of data sovereignty is the fact that it's always understanding that they're providing us permission to
Yeah.
use it and to access it. And I think that is something that we've always stressed right from the start is that it's your data. If you so choose not to work with us anymore, like we can actually export all their data in a CSV model in Excel spreadsheet and send it over and say, hey, okay, here's all your data. And CSV is the standardized model to import data back and forth into different software systems, right? So as soon as you can just send it over CSV, we wipe the drives and that's it.
Let's just say hypothetically, we imagine 5 years from now, where the technology has changed, how it's growing. What else is in your toolbox? Is there one thing that you've wondered, when are we going to get there? And what will that thing do to allow you to keep improving upon the excellent work that you're already doing?
Oh, that's an easy question. That's AI.
I thought it might be, but I didn't want to load it up too much.
I love it. That's awesome.
Yeah. We want to build AI into the whole data capturing and the whole processing system and the whole training method. Like in 5 years, we envisioned that the actual whole mentoring and training process will be an AI based model where students will actually log in. The AI model will tell them, okay, well, welcome back, Jim. Here's where we left off. Here's the things we need to learn within this time frame. And so they produce like the video and written material and do Q&As and quizzes and stuff like that. So they really reaffirms that learning model. But the other thing is with the data capture, like the whole inspection process, we envision a system where a candidate right now, like, will take a picture of a kitchen area, and then they'll have to actually examine all these aspects of the kitchen and recognize deficiencies and take closer up pictures of those deficiencies and document them in their reporting system. Well, in the future, we would like the AI model, the machine learning to actually do that. So they take the picture, AI model will look at it and compare it into a library, like a library of deficiencies, and say, okay, take another picture of the plug because there's an issue there, and then it transfers that deficiency recognition into the reporting software and say, okay, here's the issue with the plug, and here's what has to be done to be replacing it. And then it transitions that into the cost estimating as well as the scopes of work and then the actual funding applications. So it's all just a naturally fluid model that takes it from one step to the other step.
And how awesome is that as well? Because like we were talking about earlier, the cataloging of culture, indigenous culture, that would need to go into that as well, right? Like, I mean, there's an actual catalog that would need to be built as this AI model was being built, which does kind of help, for lack of a better term, record keep of all of the different cultures that would need to be there. That, like, what a cool concept that is. Yeah.
Yeah, so AI is the biggest thing that we want to produce. But one thing I also want to say was what we want to do with our revenue, because like one of the biggest things that we see with the current model with like there's approximately $2 billion that goes into Indigenous construction economy in terms of new housing and renovation funds. Out of that 2 billion, about 80-90% of that leaves through economic leakage in the pockets of consultants and contractors that really have no vested interest in promoting economic development within these communities that they're working for. So we started looking at that and saying, well, what does that actually mean if we are actually able to keep that 2 billion? And then you look at the trickle down effect for economies. So a multiplier of 3, so that's like $6 billion that can stay within the Indigenous communities. And how impactful would that be? So we started looking at that and saying, okay, well, how can we play a role in that? And we identified three areas that we need to focus on as our own company. One is education. So we're actually starting up a scholarship model to fund the 4-year degree programs as well as the 2-year trade programs for Indigenous candidates. The second stage is an Indigenous business incubator to help Indigenous people understand what it takes to stand up a business, understand taxation, legal liabilities, banking, website development, all of that stuff. And then the third stage is like capital investment And like we've purposely turned down a lot of equity investment offers and bank loans because we don't want anybody determining who we can lend money to, and because we want to break away from that all important question that's always asked at the banks: what's your credit score? We want to change that and say, do you have community support? If you have community support, you're 99% more likely to succeed. And so we want that to be the deciding factor as to whether we support a business.
I'm sure you could utilize some AI tools in the further design of those concepts as well.
Yeah.
And Stan, I want to be one of the first that sees your AI caricature who's leading these online tutorial courses. Oh man. Hey, and thank you, Stan. I mean, today's been both insightful and I've learned a lot. And I think it reminds us all that, if I come back full circle to the very beginning, that it's so important that our people lead the charge in these spaces and bring in tools that lift our people up and leave that table better set than the way we found it, and that are good for our communities. And I think what in Tommy's last question is, I'm inspired by what you want to see happen in the future, particularly using AI tools, because I think that the more we're directly involved in that, the more that particular technology in and of itself will be more reflective of who we are and where we come from. That Indigenous lens that's so important, and we have to be there leading that charge, leading that conversation. Otherwise, someone else will do it for us. And so I'm just really super thankful and appreciative of the work you're doing in this space and how you're leading, how you're out in front of this in this particular niche area, and I think it's been fabulous to chat with you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Stan. It was a pleasure having you.
All right. Yeah, it was great meeting you guys, and thanks again for providing us the opportunity.